Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we'll be talking about how woke evangelicals cannot be trusted on issues of justice. They simply do not know what justice is. This is another situation where social justice and justice are in complete conflict, and those who believe in social justice cannot comprehend actual justice, and no situation really exemplifies this quite like the Derek Chauvin trial. So we'll be taking a look at this situation with the jury selection. I'm very fascinated with murder trials specifically. I have actually sat in on three different parts of, I believe, three different murder trials I sat in on when I was in high school because I was very interested in, lawyers and law and stuff like that at the time. And I have a fascination with defense attorneys, specifically for criminal cases. So this is naturally a more interesting subject to me. And jury selection is also probably one of the most important parts of this trial process. It doesn't necessarily matter what arguments are made when the trial actually begins, and I don't think the trial will begin till the end of March, and it'll be like a 4-week trial. But this part, the jury selection, is probably one of the most important parts to watch, simply because this is about framing the audience of jurors, and that's extremely important in this case. So when you look at, you're trying to select, give or take, 12 people to be on this jury. The defense can strike people down, the prosecution can strike people down, and we see that before this there was a lawyer, and a lawyer serving on jury duty is kind of a long shot in the first place. But she answers a bunch of questions by saying, I'm not necessarily informed on this issue. I don't know what the evidence is, so I'm not going to make a determination based on evidence I'm not sure about. It's kind of like the standard, I'm waiting for evidence before I make a judgment on a situation. That was her answers in the questionnaire. And the prosecution was like, no, strike her down. And so that was the preceding juror, potential juror 29. And this is potential juror number 30. And we see that he is a woke evangelical, presumably an evangelical. And you'll understand why when you hear him talk. But he's...
My understanding, you work in a church, right?
That is correct.
And you have a position within a church of leadership, right?
Yes.
And would you describe it as a larger congregation or a smaller congregation?
It is in between, a couple hundred people, and with COVID and with starting that position in late 2019, I probably haven't even met most of the members of the congregation, or some of the members of the congregation.
Okay,
So yeah, they're a church that's not meeting, and 100 to 300, probably an evangelical church, because how many people honestly attend mainline denominations? Not that, that many is way above average, I suppose. So yeah, just establishing that this guy's a woke evangelical. What just happened, I skipped about, we just went through about 10 minutes of the defense attorney for Derek Chauvin asking potential juror 30 about his conflict resolution strategies, specifically as it pertains to his leadership in a church. So now we're going to get into the more meatier section of this, where he's talking about the questionnaire, and each potential juror received a questionnaire specifically asking them about the case, and that is what we're going to ask about, and you see that he's extremely woke.
So read or heard, do you have a general impression of the defendant? And then it gave you some boxes to check in. Let's say very negative, somewhat negative, neutral, somewhat positive, or positive, very positive. So kind of a spectrum, right? And you checked the box very negative. Do you remember that?
Sure, yes.
And when the questionnaire asks, why do you feel that way? You wrote, despite calls for help of I can't breathe from Floyd, it seems Derek murdered Floyd and the others saw or assisted the chokehold which resulted in death. Do you remember writing that?
Yes.
Okay. So it's fair to say that you formed an opinion based on what you had seen in the news or conversations from other people or social media
Yes.
that was very bad.
Yes. And of course, I do not know Derek, and I did not watch the video, which I'm sure we will cover. As a juror or a prospective juror, I would have to refrain to what is discussed and discerned in this courtroom.
And I understand that, and that's where we're going to kind of talk about some of those things.
So, you see that, he's already had a very negative opinion formed about Derek Chauvin, and no one can blame him for having a negative opinion of Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin hasn't fully helped himself out in that regard. But what's interesting is that, he's very descriptive about, I don't know if a knee on the neck really counts as a chokehold, but, he used the word murdered in his paragraph describing what he thought about the incident. So that's where we're starting.
So, but you made some interesting word choices in your answer that I want to explore with you, if that's okay.
Yep.
You said it seemed Derek murdered Floyd, right?
Yes.
And that was the opinion that you had of my client at the time you wrote this, correct?
Correct.
And so you're familiar, because the questionnaire also asks you about things like the presumption of innocence and proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You remember those questions?
Yes.
Okay. My question for you is, knowing that there's this legal principle of the presumption of innocence, and you've already formed an opinion that my client murdered Mr. Floyd, can you set aside that opinion, apply the presumption of innocence, and listen to this case?
Yes, I can.
You also, in this same paragraph, reference a chokehold which resulted in death, right? Now, one of the issues that we'll ultimately have to decide is what was the cause of death. Can you set aside your previous opinion that it was a chokehold that resulted in death and listen to the evidence in this case?
Yes. If discerned that I was an appropriate juror for this case, I would try to be as clean of the slate as possible.
And that's ultimately what we need to ask, because at the time that you if you were to be called on this juror, you have to actually be able to say, I can do it, right? Not I can try or I think I can. I need you to be able to say, I can do it. All of those opinions, they matter to you, right? And you hold them dear. Agreed?
Yes.
But in this case, we're asking you to say, none of that matters.
Yes.
Can you confidently say you can do that?
Yes.
So you have a pretty strong position that people who call 911, maybe the police shouldn't have to respond to all of these calls?
Yes, I believe that what is asked of our police officers is immense, and they, in general, do a very good job of serving our community. And it'd be great if there were help for a friend who is discerning whether or not to commit suicide, if they would be able to receive or call a number for a social worker helpline. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah, you call 911, a social worker comes to your door. That's what he recommends. Like, you see that he has a lot of interesting views on police reform here. And that's just like the start.
You are, I believe you said you somewhat agreed with the concept of defunding the Minneapolis Police Department.
I have listened to that idea, and I believe that there should be additional steps taken to provide those social worker supports that would help all people feel better and feel like they have more resources to respond to an emergency with.
And in fact, according to your questionnaire, you've actually financially supported efforts for police reform, right?
Correct.
Does that mean you've donated money to various organizations?
Yes, I've donated money to organizations that advocate for listening to diverse voices and perspectives and to form policy opinions on that.
Okay.
He's a social justice
you also
warrior.
indicate that you've written some letters to elected officials in support of those same notions, right?
Yes.
Strongly agree, I should say, with the statement that the criminal justice system is biased against racial and ethnic minorities?
Yes, I do believe that, and it's an implicit bias. It's one that sometimes I don't even recognize, that I may be biased towards someone else without even realizing it.
Well, and that raises an interesting, I guess, counterpoint, because the questionnaire asks you to agree or disagree with the following statement: I do not trust the police. And you you somewhat agreed with that proposition. So do you have a personal experience with the police that causes you to mistrust police officers?
No, I've had, in general, great experience with the police, and my perspective largely comes from seeing other incidents where people of color have been
Social
treated,
media.
by the police.
And so your mistrust of the police is within the context of racial issues?
Yes.
In the context of your answer regarding the Black Lives Matter movement, you are in favor of defunding traditional models of policing. You wrote that?
Some traditional models of policing, yes.
Okay. And the Blue Lives Matter, you state that it was well-intentioned but misguided.
Correct. Our police officers are service members that are they impact our lives and help by and large, and it's misguided when it comes to the verbiage of Blue Lives Matter when placed in context of history, I believe.
And what you wrote was the movement is unintentionally, parenthetical, for the most part, racist, as it takes the Black Lives Matter cause and adopts its saying.
Correct, yeah.
That's different than what he just said under oath there.
Third, in terms of all of these questions, are really focused on, racial justice, defunding the police, a mistrust of police because of racial issues, organizations that advocate for defunding the police. You've contributed financially to these organizations. You have very unfavorable views of this incident, right? You've formed very strong opinions, right? And so your whole being, right? Your whole being is being put on question here, right? And despite all of those beliefs, despite all of those deeply held convictions, you think you can just set that aside and be a fair and impartial juror in this case?
I believe I could if you and anyone, if the court came to that discernment that I was a proper juror for this trial.
Doesn't it feel kind of like walking into the lion's den in a sense for you?
I think for most anyone that's walked into this, they'd be lying if they didn't say that. Yeah.
So again, I have to know there's a difference between I think I can and I can, right?
Ooh.
Do you think you can do it, or can you do it?
I can be a fair juror who puts his perspective only within the bounds of this courtroom.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Your Honor, may I have a moment?
That's not a solid answer whatsoever. You're gonna want to hear what this judge says.
Question, kind of a follow-up to where we're at on this fair and impartial. And you gave a very honest and, to be honest, differential. Kind of, if we think you can be fair and impartial, then you will. But it's kind of a little bit putting the onus on us to make the decision if you can be fair and impartial, and ultimately we will. But we need to know, because only you know yourself well enough to say that I can be fair and impartial. I know myself. I know what I know what my opinions are, but I know my duty, if I'm a juror, is to be fair and impartial. And based on certain topics, some jurors very honestly say, I don't think I can. High likelihood I would try. I've never met a juror who didn't say they would try to be fair and impartial. And if you could tell me, I not only could try, and we're just asking you from the knowledge of yourself, do you think could you be fair and impartial?
I can be fair and impartial.
All right, thank you. Mr. Nelson. All right, the defense is going to excuse you, Juror 30. And so you're free to go about your business. If you get a summons in the future, come back for jury service. But this does complete your jury service for this term.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
you.
Thank you for your answers.
So yeah, that guy could not be a fair and impartial juror. And it really just comes down to the fact that this guy's so warped by social justice and his woke ideology, his woke theology, that he cannot really withstand to look at both sides. And he pretty much almost admits that. And, I don't find his answers to be very credible throughout the situation. Especially since, he was kind of trying to soften what he wrote in the questionnaire when being asked about it. And, he's given money to social justice causes specifically in response to the incident that he's supposed to be a juror for. And it's not like having strong opinions means you can't be impartial, but the fact is this guy is so unsure of whether he can be impartial in his own answers. He's not really saying yes or no, I can be an impartial or not, like the judge just said. He's basically just saying I could be impartial. And, like the judge said, that puts it on all of them to decide whether to make a judgment call, because he's so not clear about whether he can be impartial or not. And when we look at the Bible, partiality, in judgment is a sin. The Bible talks about how you should not judge the rich man because he's rich, and you should not judge the poor man because the poor man's easy to take advantage of. So we see that impartiality is a biblical command, that we need to be fair in our judgment. And, we see that throughout Scripture, Old Testament and New Testament. And woke people are incapable of doing that because they are warped. They don't have a grounded sense of reality. And we see that with this individual here who's this woke evangelical music, I don't want to say pastor, but he works in the music ministry of a church. And obviously he seems like he's way more active in his social justice cause than he actually is in his own church, by my assessment of his answers throughout the situation, because his church isn't even actually meeting. And he works for the church, but he talks about how he's not even met most of the congregation. So with that said, people who are woke can't be trusted with justice. So that's all I got to say about that. Let me know what you think about what I think. Let me know what you think about this situation. And my name is Ray. This is the Evangelical Dark Web. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and I will catch you on the next one.